Owen was watching two clocks that could not be stopped. In 73 minutes, the hospital would close refrigerated receiving for the medicine sealed behind his tractor. Beneath the highway diner, muddy water had climbed 2 cellar steps since Sarah's last mark. The newest culvert reading on his route tablet was already 12 minutes old. The retired Navy SEAL trusted measurements more than reassurance. He had parked on the highest concrete, kept the trailer cold, and refused to send frightened drivers toward a bridge no one had verified. Those choices protected the cargo and the families for the moment. They also consumed the margin that might save his contract. Inside, Sarah wrote names on the back of a menu. Outside, rain erased the edges of the service road. Owen knew his truck might soon become the only valuable machine left in reach, and every use of it would protect one duty by endangering another. He could absorb blame, lost pay, even a ruined route. What he could not yet know was whose safety would depend on the first order he gave. Blake stepped out smiling at the lens. The athlete wore a fitted training jacket and clean white shoes already stained by runoff. He turned the weather into a performance, describing the diner as if he had discovered it, rather than nearly struck the barrier protecting it. The volunteer pointed at the orange cones along the drainage edge. "Stay inside those, grounds opening below the shoulder." Blake looked at the camera, rolled his eyes, and moved 2 cones with his foot. He reversed until the SUV filled the only lane wide enough for Owen's tractor to turn. The rear tires stopped on a dark seam in the pavement. Owen stepped under the awning, rain running from his sleeves. He waited until the camera lowered. "Your rear axle is over a drainage cut," he said. "Pull straight forward while the surface still carries you. I need that lane for a medical load." Blake glanced at the plain jacket, work boots, and gray at Owen's temples. "Drive around?" "The shoulder won't carry the trailer." "Then maybe you shouldn't be driving something that big." Owen pointed to the shallow depression where water pulsed through the gravel. "If a trailer wheel crosses that, the axle goes down. Move forward 6 feet. That's all." The request was small enough that refusal could only be about control. Blake looked toward the live camera again. "You're weak," he said. "Afraid of a little mud and a tight turn." He put both hands against Owen's chest and shoved. Owen shifted 1 foot back, accepted the force, and stayed upright. Years earlier, as a Navy SEAL, he had learned how quickly a hand at that distance could become a weapon and how little strength it took to end the threat. None of that would clear the lane. Striking Blake would bring police, delay the cargo, and turn a failing shoulder into a spectacle. Owen raised his open hands. "Move the vehicle." Blake laughed for the audience and walked into the diner. His assistant followed, still filming. The volunteer remained beside the displaced cones, staring at the tire marks Blake had left across them. A sound like a dinner plate breaking came from beneath the SUV. The black seam opened under the rear axle. The vehicle slid a few inches toward the ditch and stopped at an angle, its nose now covering more of the lane. The volunteer struck the passenger window with her palm. Blake came back outside with his phone raised. "Start it now," she told him. "Wheel straight, no throttle until I'm clear." He climbed in and turned hard toward the pavement. Before she had moved, he pressed the accelerator. The rear tires spun and threw mud across the glass. The SUV advanced less than a foot, then dropped until the left running board touched the shoulder. Owen caught the volunteer by the back of her raincoat and pulled her uphill. A slab broke where her boots had been and vanished beneath the bumper. Water that should have run toward the culvert now pressed against the vehicle and curled back into the lot. "Engine off," Owen said. Blake kept his foot down for another second. The rear wheel dug a hollow beneath itself. When he finally stopped, the SUV rested with both rear tires below the pavement. Owen did not go near the underbody. He photographed the cone positions, the new tire cuts, and 3 visible fractures in the asphalt. A recovery crew would need those facts before choosing any anchor. He walked the edge of firm ground, placed reflective markers at 3 points, and measured the gap between the SUV's front bumper and the nearest bollard. Even with his mirrors folded, the tractor could not pass. Blake blamed the cones first, then the volunteer, then the diner owner. The volunteer showed him a photograph from 20 minutes earlier, both cones upright, the shoulder intact, his SUV absent. He turned away from it. Sarah opened the diner door with a serving tray above her head. "County radio changed to a road closure order," she said. "West Pass at 9:20. "How many people?" Owen asked. 12 confirmed. More in the restrooms and pantry. An evacuation bus turned back and dropped some here. Count twice. Match every vehicle to a name. Mark anyone who needs medicine or help walking." "Can we send the cars out before the road closes?" Owen looked beyond the lot. 7 vehicles stood between the diner and the service road. 2 belonged to older drivers whose hands shook too badly to hold their keys. Sending them toward an unverified culvert might trade a solid building for moving water. Not until we know what the eastern side can carry. Sarah studied him, then nodded. He had not promised rescue or claimed authority. He had given her a decision that depended on facts she could collect. Blake held up his phone. "Tow company says 10 minutes. Everybody relax." Sarah called the number on his screen. A recording announced that commercial recovery service had been suspended across the county. The time Blake had read was an automated estimate, not a dispatched truck. Owen took a steel probe, tire depth gauge, tape, and 2 more markers from his tractor. On the eastern edge, he pressed the probe through gravel until it met packed stone. 4 feet farther south, it sank to the handle. He marked both points and asked the volunteer to watch them. If water reached the red band on the lower marker, the service road could no longer be treated as load-bearing. Inside, Sarah worked from register receipts. She found the owner of every parked vehicle and learned that 5 people could not cross moving water without help. A woman with insulin had enough for the night. An older man had left his heart medication in an evacuation bus that was now on the far side of the closure. Hank, the cook, opened the cellar door. Muddy water glimmered on the bottom step. He measured from the tread with a wooden spoon, wrote the depth on the wall in pencil, and shut the door. 5 minutes later, he checked again. The water had climbed 2 inches. The lights dimmed. A compressor under the counter stopped, restarted, then went silent. Sarah moved the insulin into the diner's small battery cooler and labeled it with the woman's name. Outside, Blake recruited 3 men to push the SUV. Owen stopped them before they entered the ditch. "Uphill side only," he said. "No one behind the vehicle. 1 attempt, engine at idle. If the pavement moves, you leave it." Blake objected to taking orders from the man he had pushed, but the older farmer beside him asked which part of the instruction he wanted to gamble his leg against. Blake said nothing. They set their boots on the remaining asphalt and pushed from the front quarter panel. The wheel turned once, failed to climb, and shaved another strip from the shoulder. The volunteer called that the lower marker had shifted. Owen ended the attempt. All 4 men returned under the awning. Nothing had been solved, but no one had been pulled under the SUV. The assistant tried to step down the bank for a closer shot. His boot sank to the ankle. Owen caught his vest and brought him back as another piece of asphalt fell away. The young man lowered the camera and did not raise it again. Sarah brought Owen a paper placemat with the times she had collected. Road order, cellar readings, generator fuel, 2 medication needs, and 19 names after her second count. Owen added the current temperature of the trailer and the remaining refrigeration reserve. "Can the truck leave backward?" she asked. "Maybe once. The turn would cross ground we haven't proved. If it fails, the trailer blocks the loading door. And if it works?" Owen looked at the 19 names. "The passage collapses behind it." He called freight dispatch and asked for a route engineer. None was available. The dispatcher repeated that refrigerated receiving would close soon and any deviation would be reviewed. Owen acknowledged both statements without offering an answer. Sarah still had 3 vehicle keys from people who could not drive. Owen used chalk to mark a short route that stayed above the drainage cracks, then had each owner authorize a volunteer driver by name. They moved 2 sedans nose to tail beside the pumps and put the empty evacuation van near the loading dock, creating a dry assembly area without sending anyone onto the closed road. The third car made a grinding noise when shifted, so Owen stopped it after 6 feet rather than forcing the transmission. Sarah wrote its position beside the owner's name. The rearrangement did not open the tractor's turn, but it separated people from moving equipment and left a clear lane between the diner and the loading door. When Blake suggested towing his SUV with all 3 cars at once, the farmer pointed at their unreinforced tie points. Owen did not debate him. He wrote each vehicle's rated capacity beneath the cellar times and crossed the idea out. The diner was still dry through its center aisle. The medical load remained cold. The county road had not failed at the entrance. No one was trapped yet. But the SUV occupied the only proven turn. Water climbed the cellar steps, and every untested shortcut now threatened to remove an option from everyone else. The red band on the lower marker disappeared beneath brown water. The volunteer called the time through the doorway, and Sarah added it to the placemat. Owen compared it with Hank's cellar mark. Both had risen faster during the last 10 minutes than during the 20 before them. He did not announce that the situation was worse. He changed the work. "Move everyone beyond the center aisle," he told Sarah. "Keep the loading door lane open." She paired each of the 5 people who needed help walking with someone named on her list. Hank turned off the fryer circuit before water reached the cellar panel. The older farmer, Mr. Bell, took a table cover and began drawing the buried drainage line from memory. Each action removed one uncertainty and exposed another. Blake stood beside the cold coffee station, water dripping from his training jacket. "We pushed wrong," he said. "Give me 6 guys and we lift the rear." Mr. Bell drew a 3-ton weight beside the ditch and handed Blake the pencil. "Show us where 6 men stand without stepping on the broken edge." Blake stared at the drawing. There was no place to mark. Owen crouched by the cellar door as Hank opened it. The water had reached the 3rd step. A floating carton struck the wall below. Owen timed how long it took to climb the width of 1 tile, then asked Sarah when the generator room would flood. "Before it reaches the dining floor," she said. "The intake is lower than this door." "How much fuel?" 7 hours if it stays dry. None if the intake goes under. They moved the battery cooler, first aid box, flashlights, and radio to the loading area. Sarah assigned each item to a person instead of building a pile no one owned. The woman with insulin carried her own cooler. Hank kept the bolt cutters and pry bar. Mr. Bell took the steel probe. Owen examined the service path behind the diner with Mr. Bell's drainage map held beneath his jacket. The gravel looked higher than the front lot, but 3 field culverts emptied under it. He drove the probe into the first marked line. Water rose around the shaft. At the second, the gravel shifted before he applied his weight. Only a narrow strip nearest the building still reached packed stone. The tractor might cross that strip once if Owen disconnected the trailer and approached straight. The rear wheels would then cut the path between the diner and higher ground. The cab could escape. 19 people in the sealed medicine trailer would remain behind it. Owen measured anyway. He recorded the width, the distance to the propane tank, and the angle required to return. Rejecting the route without numbers would be another guess. The final measurement put the trailer wheels 14 inches beyond the last stable line. "So you can get your cab out," Blake said from behind him. He had followed without being asked. "Do it, then call somebody from the road." "The road is closed." "You don't know that." Owen handed him the county message. Blake read the bridge coordinates twice. His expression changed when he recognized the turn he had used to reach the diner. "My crew came that way," he said. "They can't return that way." Blake called his driver. The call connected, broke into static, then returned long enough for the man to report that a deputy had turned them toward the ridge shelter. Blake asked whether they could bring another vehicle. The deputy took the phone and said no civilian traffic would enter the flooded corridor. Sarah came outside with the revised head count. 19 people. 2 needed medication before morning. 5 required assistance over uneven ground. 1 child had asthma, though his inhaler remained with him. She had checked the restroom, pantry, office, kitchen, and parked cars twice. "Write the 19 on the loading wall," Owen said. "Big enough to read from the truck." "Why the truck?" "Because every route we test has to account for all 19. That was not a rescue plan. It was a rule against solving only the easiest part of the problem. Hank reported 2 industrial chains in the maintenance shed, 4 ratchet straps, braided rope, canvas tarps, and removable oak panels bolted to the loading dock. Owen checked each chain for a stamped working load. One stamp remained legible. The other chain had rust beneath a welded repair and was removed from consideration. 2 straps were suitable only for cargo restraint. The rope could guide people but not pull a vehicle. The oak panels were sound along their center boards. Their outer edges had softened near the bolts. Sarah rolled a loaded flour bin across one panel while Hank braced it. The wood bowed and returned. It could carry one person at a time if supported at both ends. Blake watched them reject half the available equipment. "You're throwing away everything we have." "I'm removing what fails under load," Owen said. "Same thing if we drown." Sarah put the head count list in Blake's hand. "Then choose which name tests the bad chain." He gave it back. The county dispatcher called Sarah's landline because cellular service had begun to fail. A washed bridge had pushed the nearest high-water vehicle beyond 90 minutes. The dispatcher asked for the number of evacuees, building condition, medical needs, and a safe approach. Sarah supplied the first 3. There was still no safe approach to give. Owen checked his refrigeration unit. Its reserve showed less than 2 hours. The hospital could divert a smaller van from the ridge only after the county opened a lane. Missing receiving no longer meant only a late signature. 2 damp cartons or a broken seal could force inspection of the shipment. He called freight dispatch again. "Can another tractor reach my trailer from the ridge?" "No route from that side," the dispatcher said. "You still have time to uncouple and save the cab." "And leave the load?" "Preserve company equipment where possible." Owen looked at Sarah's 19 names painted in marker beside the door. "Log that instruction with the road status." The dispatcher paused. "Are you declaring a civilian emergency?" "Not yet. I'm verifying what the truck can do." He ended the call before the choice could be made for him. Blake's assistant brought the SUV manual from the glove compartment. The towing page listed decorative hooks at the bumper and a rated crossmember beneath the rear body. The electric winch carried enough load for a controlled lateral draw, not a direct lift. Its synthetic line showed no cuts. 2 shackles were stamped above the required working force. Owen asked Blake to bring the controller, line damper, and rated shackles to the awning. "Are we pulling it?" Blake asked. "We're finding out whether your equipment can be used. Tell me the plan." "There isn't one until the ground, line, panels, people, and truck fit the same answer." Blake went to the SUV without his camera. On the uphill side, he opened the rear hatch and passed each item to Hank. He tried to hand over a polished tow hook. Owen pointed to the small, raised lettering that marked it for road recovery only. "Then what do you want?" The shackle marked 12,000. Blake searched the compartment, found it beneath a tool roll, and read the stamp before passing it over. It was the first order he completed without adding his own shortcut. Mr. Bell probed a diagonal line from the loading dock to the firm patch behind Owen's tractor. The first 2 points held. At the third, water pushed through the hole. He shifted uphill and found stone again. Sarah marked the usable points with strips cut from a red tablecloth. The result was not a road. It was a narrow approach that could carry the tractor's front axle and 2 short pedestrian panels if the SUV moved sideways. Owen measured the sweep of the SUV's nose. A direct pull would send it across that approach. Holding the nose with the winch while the tractor drew the rear crossmember might rotate it onto the remaining pavement. The forces could work together. They could also close the only lane if Blake drew at the wrong time. Owen made Blake hold the winch controller and repeat 3 hand signals. Hold, draw, release. "If you lose sight of me?" Owen asked. "I stop." "Stop means what?" Blake looked at the buttons. "Release power and hold the line. If the line jumps, release it and move uphill." "If I yell to pull harder?" Blake almost answered, then saw the test. "You won't use a vague order, you'll give the signal." Owen took back the controller. Blake had learned the sequence. He had not yet proved he would follow it under strain. Inside, the generator coughed, and half the ceiling lights went out. Hank shut the cellar door on water now touching the top step. Sarah moved everyone to the loading side and called each name. 19 voices answered, some steady, some shaking. A farmer proposed anchoring the bad chain to the diner's support column. Owen checked the column base and found water seeping through a new crack. The pull might clear the SUV by tearing open the wall. They rejected it. Another suggested driving the SUV deeper into the ditch to free the lane. That would place its battery and fuel system in the current and remove the winch they might need. They rejected that, too. No idea was dismissed because it came from the wrong person. Each failed against a measurement or created a worse consequence. Water crossed the front threshold in a thin sheet. Sarah shortened the distance between each mobility pair and placed dry towels along the loading route. The child with asthma began to breathe too quickly. She crouched beside him, asked him to count the red cloth markers, and matched his breathing to the count. His mother checked the inhaler and kept it ready. Blake stood near the window, silent now. His SUV had caused the obstruction, but its rated winch might help control it. His fame could not bring a tow truck through a washed bridge. His money could not make the patched chain safe. The only useful thing he possessed was equipment and the ability to obey someone else's timing. Sarah set the menu beside Owen's route tablet. The head count, medication marks, cargo clock, generator loss, and delayed county vehicle occupied the same small space. "If you save the cab," she said, "what happens here?" "The service strip fails behind me. If you leave the truck where it is, the loading approach stays blocked by his SUV. And if you use it?" Owen looked at the stable patch, the rated chain, the winch controller, and the oak panels. "Then I breach the route, risk the tractor, and trust him with one part that cannot be late." The dispatcher called once more. The high-water vehicle had stopped for a washed culvert. Arrival was now unknown. Owen's refrigeration reserve and the generator were no longer clocks he could wait out. At the cellar door, the last dry towel darkened from one end to the other. Outside, help would not arrive before the building lost power and access. The rear escape would strand everyone else. Ordinary towing had failed, and the remaining approach depended on equipment Blake had caused them to need. Owen had not yet committed his truck or his job. Every fact on the table had removed the option of doing nothing. Owen aligned the rated shackle, controller, movement list, and ground map on the counter. The SUV had to rotate without sweeping the lane. The panels remain empty during the pull, and Blake released power at Owen's closed fist. Sound equipment on bad timing would still injure someone. He gave Blake the controller and had him operate the winch with no load. Draw for one count. Hold. Release. The motor answered each button after a slight delay. On the second test, Blake anticipated the count and touched draw early. Owen took the controller from him. "That's what happens when you guess," Owen said. Blake looked toward the water at his SUV's wheels. Again. Owen returned it. Blake waited through 3 full signals without moving his thumb, then drew 1 foot of line and stopped on the closed fist. He rewound it under tension so it would not bind when they needed the full length. The athlete had not earned trust. He had produced one verified behavior they could build upon. Sarah converted her head count into an order of movement. She placed the 5 people needing assistance between named partners, kept the child with asthma beside his mother, and made every adult identify who would follow. One father asked to move first. Sarah showed him the older woman who needed the rope rail. He accepted the 4th pair. Owen assigned 2 abort calls that did not depend on his view. Mr. Bell would shout "ground" if the painted crack crossed his marker. Sarah would shout "lane" if any person entered the equipment corridor. Either word ended the pull, no matter how close the SUV seemed to moving. Blake repeated both words and the required response. Release power, move uphill, wait. Another delay could improve nothing. The people had an order, the line a measured response, and 2 observers could stop the attempt. Owen placed Sarah's menu beside his route device, opened the company record, and selected the emergency deviation field himself. He opened the route record and entered the deviation himself. Civilian emergency. Road impassable. Vehicle committed to evacuation. The confirmation tone was almost too soft to hear beneath the rain, yet it closed the only path that might have saved his job. Dispatch would see the breach in real time. His delivery clock kept counting. Sarah watched him put the device away. "What did that do?" made the choice permanent. Owen handed Blake an orange vest, controller and rated shackles. Camera stays here. Blake put on the vest without arguing. Owen divided the room. Sarah would order the evacuees in pairs. Hank and two farmers would release the oak panels, and Mr. Bell would watch the asphalt crack. Panic gave way to assigned work. At the SUV, Owen rejected the decorative bumper hooks and traced the solid rear crossmember through the bodywork. Blake had to reach it from the uphill side. Hank held a guide rope around his waist while Owen made him repeat the release signal. Blake seated the first shackle backward. Owen stopped him, waited, and made him find the steel again. The second time, the pin held the correct angle. Blake emerged shaking and did not pretend the mistake had been anyone else's. The dock panels became two short tracks across the washed edge. Sarah rolled a loaded flour bin across the first while Hank braced it. The wood bowed but held. She shifted the second panel where the concrete lip still carried weight and marked the lane with strips from a red tablecloth. By the time Owen backed the tractor onto Mr. Bell's stable patch, she had a crossing route and an order of movement. Owen did not connect the semi directly to the SUV. He ran one chain through the frame point Blake had secured and returned it to a tow eye on the tractor, creating a controlled line that would pull the obstruction sideways instead of deeper into the ditch. The winch would keep the SUV's nose from swinging into the makeshift walkway. He showed Blake 3 hand signals: hold, draw, release. If you lose sight of me, I hold. If the line jumps, I release and move uphill. If I tell you to pull harder, Blake finally understood the trap in the question. You won't, you'll give the count. Owen nodded and climbed into his cab. The first pull moved nothing. Diesel pressure traveled through the frame and raised the chain from the mud. But Owen stopped before the tires broke traction. Mr. Bell called that the asphalt crack had widened. Sarah moved everyone another 10 feet from the glass. Blake held the controller still, though every habit in him urged one grand effort. Owen eased the tractor forward half a wheel, changing the angle. He raised 2 fingers. Blake drew the winch on the second count. The SUV shifted with a low groan, then settled against the bank. On the third count, Hank slid a dock panel beneath the rear tire. Owen waited for the engine to return to idle before signaling again. This time, the wheel climbed. The chain stayed aligned. Blake released exactly when Owen closed his fist, preventing the vehicle's nose from sweeping across the escape lane. The SUV came onto the remaining asphalt sideways, ugly and slow, but clear of the loading door. The road out was still flooded. What they had won was a safe approach to the truck and a few feet of firm ground before the diner failed. Sarah did not wait for congratulations. She called the first 2 names. Families crossed under a canvas tarp, kept far from the water's edge. Hank braced the panels. Blake remained at the guideline and answered Owen's signals without adding his own. A sharp crack came from the front of the building. Water pushed beneath the entrance and spread across the tile. Sarah shortened the interval between pairs but did not change their order. An older woman froze at the first panel. Owen stepped beside her, placed her hand on the dry rail he had made from braided rope, and matched his pace to hers. She crossed without looking down. The final name belonged to Sarah. She checked the restroom, kitchen, pantry, and booths before marking herself. When she reached the truck, the first window shattered behind her under the pressure of muddy water. No one was close to it. The last panel lifted at one end and disappeared into the brown current. Sarah split the 19 among 4 vehicles on the elevated strip. The 5 needing help took the tractor cab and sleeper. 8 used the evacuation van. 3 entered each sedan. Named drivers kept the keys, exhausts faced open air, and heat ran in intervals. Owen kept the trailer sealed. Sarah counted at each door and again by radio. Blake waited outside until she assigned him a van seat. He obeyed. The rescue channel on Owen's radio came alive 40 minutes later. A county high-water vehicle approached from the ridge, followed by a refrigerated hospital van that had been diverted after dispatch received Owen's route deviation notice. Owen gave coordinates, the number of evacuees, the medical needs, and the condition of his cargo. He did not mention Blake's fame or his own service. Those facts could not lower the water. At dawn, county workers carried the evacuees across a temporary aluminum walkway. Sarah stayed with the incident officer until every name had a destination: the shelter, an examination for cold exposure, or the clinic. Her 2 counts matched. Owen and the hospital driver compared temperature records before breaking either seal. The refrigeration unit had held, but its reserve fuel was nearly gone, and the delivery window had been missed. They transferred the insulated cases beneath a corridor of tarps. 2 damp outer cartons were isolated for inspection. The rest remained within range and left under a new chain of custody. Owen signed the transfer form, knowing it did not erase his violation. He had abandoned his route, used company equipment in an unauthorized recovery, and exposed the tractor to flood damage. His dispatcher called before the hospital van left. "Park it when the county clears a lane," the supervisor said. "You're suspended from dispatch pending review." "Understood. You could have saved the cab." Owen looked through the windshield at Sarah guiding a paramedic toward the 2 names marked on her menu. Yes. He ended the call without asking for special treatment. The receding water exposed what the night had taken. Chairs lay against the counter. The freezer motors were silent. Silt covered the kitchen floor, and a building inspector placed a red notice on the door. The diner would remain closed until its foundation, wiring, and water system could be replaced. Hank read the notice twice. Then he sat on an overturned milk crate and calculated how many weeks his savings could cover rent. Sarah gathered the staff near the county truck. There were 8 of them, including a dishwasher who had not been working that night and a waitress caring for her mother. She wrote their weekly wages beside their names. The figures were modest, but the total silenced the group. Damage to a building was visible. A missed paycheck was quieter and could break a household just as surely. Blake listened from several yards away. His assistant approached with the phone and whispered that clips from the first confrontation were already spreading. Blake looked at the screen only long enough to see himself moving the warning cones. He turned it face down. "Keep the original recording," he said. "All of it. Give it to the county." His manager called and advised him to leave before reporters arrived. His attorney warned him not to admit fault. Blake asked Sarah for the wage list instead. The incident officer recorded Blake describing the moved barriers: blocked truck, ignored warning, and push. He did not blame the storm or the pavement. He released the live stream and vehicle data to investigators, then placed enough money in escrow to cover 6 months of wages while engineers determined how long rebuilding would take. Sarah did not thank him. "Direct payments every Friday," she said. "No publicity event. No one waits for your insurance dispute." Blake looked toward Owen, perhaps expecting the trucker to soften the demand. Owen was checking water in the tractor's wheel hubs with a county mechanic. "Every Friday," Blake agreed. Responsibility did not restore the diner. It kept Hank from losing his apartment and the dishwasher's electricity on. Blake also accepted the repair deductible and the cost of a temporary food trailer. His sponsors received the same unedited statement as the investigators. 2 ended their contracts before sunset. Owen's review took place 3 days later in a freight office that smelled of coffee and wet coats. The safety director laid out photographs of the flooded tractor, and a compliance officer displayed the second Owen had entered the deviation. Nobody called him a hero. They asked why he had used the tractor as an anchor, and whether 19 civilians justified risking a medical load. Owen answered with times, distances, and names. He admitted the policy breach and supplied the temperature log, Sarah's head count, flood readings, and the transfer receipt. The board suspended him for 2 weeks without route pay while the tractor underwent inspection. They kept his license and contract. Before his next assignment, he would help write a company protocol for drivers trapped at civilian emergency sites. Sarah's list became the county's clearest evacuation record. The incident officer sent her to emergency coordination training, then hired her to map shelters, generators, and residents who needed transport. She brought Hank when she inspected the church shelter's kitchen. She treated authority as a duty to account for people, not a reason to command attention. 2 weeks after the flood, Owen returned to the diner site in a loaned tractor. His suspension had ended, though the repair charge would follow him through several pay periods. The food trailer was open beside the road. Hank served coffee through a square window while electricians worked inside the stripped building. Every employee had received both Friday payments on time. Blake was there without an entourage. The county had installed new drainage markers, and a crew was setting a heavier barrier where he had moved the cones. When one worker left to unload concrete blocks, Owen pointed to the loose end of the barrier. "Hold that upright. Keep it inside the painted line." Blake took the weight without a joke. Rainwater from a brief morning shower ran along the new channel instead of across the parking lot. Behind him, the hospital sent confirmation that the transferred medicine had cleared inspection and reached its destination. Sarah stood at a folding table, checking the crew, the diner staff, and the arriving trainees against 3 separate lists. Owen climbed back into his cab when the lane opened. In the mirror, the champion was still holding the barrier exactly where he had been told, waiting for the worker to secure it. No camera watched him. No crowd knew his name. This time, that did not change the work.